Hey everybody, welcome to my next free tutorial Friday. I'm going to take the same line drawing I had from last week, and I was just showing you a couple of ellipse guides I'm going to use this week. There's some Copic markers I'm going to use, paintbrush, some Copic opaque white I like to use, and I am going to do traditional media rendering on this week. What I mean by that is I'm going to use markers and a bit of gouache. So here I'm going to pop down a little bit of orange, and I'm going to use a little bit of this white. Typically I use that Copic all the time if I'm doing white only, but I want to mix the white with the orange, so I want them to be the same brand. And I am going to marker this with renders. I'm also going to use a little bit of a warm color, so I'm using E41. It's called Pearl White, I think. And it's just to warm up the ground plane, so I have a little bit of bounced light that's warm. And I'm also going to cool down the background, so I'm going to use cool markers for this one. So it's much like last week's tutorial. Same drawing. I just printed it from Photoshop. So I scanned it out of my sketchbook, printed it on a piece of like copy paper, and grabbing some markers. And so basically we do the same thing, same rendering, same steps, but all with markers instead of Photoshop. And you'll see that it's pretty much the exact same thing. So hopefully it still works for you. It's just using a different medium, but it's going to be picking all the same values. I'm going to change it up a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about lighting. We have basically an overhead light source, and if I had no shadow on this, I might move the light around a little bit, but since I already have a shadow as part of my line drawing, I'm just going to go with it in this top lighting scenario and see if it works. And so you start with the light markers first, and then you go darker because they're permanent. Right? If you screw up and you make it dark, the only way to get it light again is to go back over with white pencil or gouache. So you always want to sort of sneak up when you're doing marker work and sort of sneak up on the values, because you can always go darker, but you can't go lighter. Not easily anyway. So I already know from doing the one in Photoshop, and I already did one actually before this guy to see if I wanted to do this or not. And so I kind of already know my value structure, so it makes it a little easier. If I was just starting this out and I hadn't done a prior sketch, I might not go in, and darken the shadow all the way to like this. I think is number 4. So these are cool gray markers, and this is number 4, and I'm just blocking out. And I'm thinking a little bit about my value graphics. So if you watch my proximity-based styling lecture, you know what I'm talking about. Where if the tires are dark rubber and the rest of the vehicle is lighter, then the sort of in the light of that tire, so across the top half, it's only going to get to a certain value. So I could say, well, the brightest that tire is going to ever get is a value 4, right? So you grab a number 4 marker, and you can just block in the entire tire. And with all of it blocked in, then you have to just work darker from that. And it's just doing a loose cast shadow there across that little side structure from that overhead sort of container that's sticking on the back of this truck. And then you start going darker. So the first thing I did was hit the like the number 2 side there with I think a number 3 marker. So again, it's sort of top lit, right? You can see the shadow straight down. So I'm going to say it's getting a little bit of light on these vertical sides so that I can do a bit of that cast shadow that I just blocked in there. So just cheat it a little bit towards us, the position of the light, and allows me to cast a little shadows on that vertical surface, which helps the form to read a bit. Now what's really nice about having a line drawing that's all finished, and you've defined all your sections and your surfaces, it really provides you with a nice roadmap to go back in and apply your values. And we saw my left hand pop in there. I was holding a big stack of them, so that tends to be how I work. So I hold a big stack of markers because I like to work quickly. And a lot of times if you're trying to do gradations with markers, you need to work while they're still wet and push. And so you block it in, you sort of wet it out with a light marker, and see, like right there, I'm just blocking it in. And this is relative light marker. It's like a 5, and then I'm going to use a 4 while it's still wet and sort of smear that, and blend that around. So I'm just going to hit it there with a little 4, maybe a 5. That's right in the core shadow, and then I'm just going to smooth it out. And so you can just keep getting darker and darker and darker. So it's pretty easy to, keep evaluating your values, and then pushing where you need to, and you can get the markers to do gradations. It's going to have a few steps, but it's okay. Your eye will blend that together. And if you want to really try and get out the gradation or the steps, then you can come back over it with a pencil if you wanted, and you could smooth out those steps. But in this case, it's fine, quick sketch. And the sketch measures, you can tell by my hand, it measures about 6 inches, a little more than 6 inches wide, which is a pretty nice scale for these markers. If it was any larger, I would have a tough time, as you'll see, because I'm going to block in the background as well. Now, you don't have to do the background, but in this case, I wanted the brightness of the top of the truck to come to life a bit. And in order to make that happen, because it's basically white on white paper, the only way to make that happen is to put something dark behind it. So we'll get there in a couple minutes. This one I sped up about 250%. I think last week's was about 200. So this one took a little bit longer, I think. Probably because I just, I'm not quite, I haven't been doing a lot of marker sketching, and I had to go redo my whole setup this morning with my camera, so I haven't been working over there. But these are pretty quick ones to do. If I'd sort of at my normal desk with the whole setup and everything accessible and easy to get going, probably about the same time as Photoshop. So I think they should run about this sketch about 35 minutes, maybe 35 to 45. So with traditional media, this probably took 45. Last week, I think, took about 35 with Photoshop. Photoshop's a little faster because it's not color picking back and forth. You can just pick from the sketch once you get it blocked in. So on and off caps of markers, that sort of stuff, takes a little while. And you have to mix up some gouache, right, that sort of thing. But it's pretty fun. I love traditional media sketching. Markers are really fun, and it's what's nice too, you have this like very tangible sketch when you're done, that it's on a real piece of paper. That's always fun. I think it shows a lot of times better than something done in Photoshop. Even if you print the thing out of Photoshop, there's just something about it that doesn't have quite the same appeal. So here I'm blocking in the background and pushing that a bit, and you'll see as I go around, right, and add the background, then the top surface of that shape of that box on the back of this truck really comes to life because it's up against that darker value. Now really, you squint your eyes at it, it looks more like light landing across the top surface of it. I tried to not flip this very much this week. I did it just a couple times where I had to get to an edge, right? It was very hard to hold the marker that other direction and without screwing up the top edge of that shape. So typically when I'm working, I'll spin that page around a lot, but in this case I tried to keep it to a minimum. So just a couple times. Couldn't get to where I needed to go without spinning it. So going in and seeing, there's a couple more little chamfers in there to that form, so I could go back in and push those a little bit darker. And it's always a balance, right? You're always just like very carefully, sneaking up on the value, looking at it, saying, oh, could I push that a little more, or is that just right? Or, what about the shadow side? Could that go a little darker? And again, you just have to be careful. Those have sort of angles on them. They're not exactly horizontal, so I said to myself, well, those shouldn't be, as bright as the top. In theory, it's about the same angle as the top, so I'm going to probably have to come back and brighten that up. But when I lay in the marker, you see it's much darker than when it dries. So that was only like a cool value marker 1, probably. So it'll dry even lighter. And I'm doing a little bit ambient occlusion in there, and that's where the light has a hard time getting into those crevices. So going into wherever I have those crevices, and it's going to be a tough area for the light to get in, and just pushing in some more darks. Also, those little, I-beam kind of structures that are holding that box to the frame, maybe those could even be painted darker inside those hollow areas. So it could be value graphics, but also could just be ambient occlusion, making them darker. And here we're getting less light from the sky, under the truck there. So again, some more ambient occlusion from the sky lighting into the shadow. So I'm adding some gradations based on that. So wherever your shadow is sort of the closest to the vehicle and gets the least amount of light, that's where you go in and make it darker. Here I have, this is like an indigo blue Prismacolor pencil. So this is the full mixed media. We've got marker, colored pencil, and a bit of gouache. So I'm just making that shadow a bit more blue, And to have it make sense, I want to use my sky, right? I need the color behind the vehicle to be a little more blue. So I'm just sort of, softly adding a little gradation over the top of my marker to make it a bit cooler. You could also do this with a marker. I could have grabbed a really light blue marker and just gone in and hit my shadow and also hit the background behind my vehicle. But in this case, I sort of liked the texture and wanted to use some pencil as part of the demo. So you can see I'm just putting in some sort of sketchy lines to add a bit of texture to the background. And now I'd come back and say, well, I want that local value and the value graphics of those tires. I want those definitely be a darker rubber. So they're mixing in a little bit too much with the frame of the vehicle behind it. So I want to push those a bit darker. Could even go more extreme, obviously, if they're really dark. And I'm going to push that core shadow a bit. Try to make them look more round. That works a bit better. And we're about 2/3 of the way through this one, so a quick one. And again, it's really all the same physics. It's just using different medium. In this case, the Copic markers versus Photoshop. And like I said, I like them both, but it's a fun way to work. Looks like I already hit that yellow in there. I missed that. I wasn't paying attention. Sorry. I went in and put the yellow marker, the color of the ground. I probably did it when I was doing the ground. And put it on all the underside surfaces of my vehicle, wherever the reflected light. So the light's going to come down, bounces off that yellowish ground, then bounces up under those chamfered surfaces. So anywhere those surfaces point down towards the ground, I just went right in there and I mixed the yellow with the cool gray. So I missed that somewhere along the way in my audio, but that's the step. And I was looking at it and thinking, no, that that vertical side, if it's top lighting, could be even darker. Like I said, true vertical surface with a vertical light is a really poor lighting strategy, but imagine just pull the light out, a couple degrees so we can get a little bit of that light shining on the verticals. But it's really like my number 2 side there. It's not perfectly tangent to that surface. And here I'm grabbing an orange pencil and put a couple stripes on the rims just to give it a little color accent. This is my 50-degree ellipse guide. So I'd already pulled those earlier, so they would be ready. And here I'm just trying to fill in that area a little bit down there to give a little color accent to that rim. There's my spiky hair showing up today. It's tough to use ellipse guides unless you look sort of straight down on them. And so that's why you're seeing my head poke in there. Still didn't quite get to look straight down, but it's hard to line them up unless you do that. And I wanted to add a subtle color pop to the side of this vehicle, but I didn't really want to get in there and paint that all with gouache and make it really, really tight and also very opaque. I want it to be very subtle. So that's why I grabbed an orange pencil and just blocked out a couple of, and I just went over what I had already drawn in my sketch just to shift the color a little bit. And I'm dropping a couple little other orange bits here and there. And then I'm going to grab some orange gouache, which is probably coming up next. Or maybe we do white first. And that'll be the last steps. A little bit of white gouache and a little bit of orange gouache. So here I'm using like, I think a number 4 round brush. And just pulling out a couple little details. The brush is the best for putting in the small details. So if you want some really fine details on it, get a paintbrush. Don't use like a white highlighter pen, that sort of stuff. They're just awful. You saw me just touch my middle finger to that. If before the gouache dries and it's too bright and it's too opaque over that surface, you can just hit it with your finger and knock it down a bit. If you have a lot of gouache on there, of course, that's going to smear a lot. But if you don't have that much on, you just sort of touch it with your finger. And see, like those were in shadow down sort of at the bottom, so I just touched it and it made it a little bit more transparent. And by doing that, it sort of mixes with the gray marker underneath. Like that one was too bright, so I just knocked it off a bit. And I do that quite a bit when I'm painting details. I'm going to put some little, I've never really been happy on the design with that little gap right there between the cab structure and that box. So just decided I'm going to drop a couple little louvered vents in there. And that's what's catching some light, the edges of those louvers, and we'll go back and cast a shadow towards the very end. So here I'm going over the top of my line drawing and trying to push the quality of the light across the top surface a bit. And here I'm actually even getting rid of the heavy line work that's holding that edge and actually letting the white hold that edge because I have a nice value to the background. So there I can use value instead of using my line. You know, line, when it travels around a silhouette like that, is kind of like just a moving little background. But if you have value, you don't really need that. So getting some of those little seams and things to show up. And if it's not bright enough, just go back and hit it again. There's a little step here to the form. I don't want to make that little value change across there. And here's some orange for some little tail lights or graphics at the back of this. Doesn't exactly match the orange of my pencil. Could have taken some more time to mix that up. But what I'll do here in the end is put a little of that orange onto my tire stripe to get them to work a little bit better together. And that's about it. I think just a couple more little touch-ups here and there. Yeah, a couple more. I'm probably going to hit this tire if I remember right. And then I'm going to show you the one I did before this, which has a slightly different color palette, mainly because I used a warmer marker across the top, like it was kind of a colored light landing on my vehicle as well as the ground. So I'll show you that, but this is a finished one. Maybe I will scan these, put them on my Facebook page or something like that, or Instagram them or something. But there you go. That is my marker sketch this week. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and give it a try. It's a lot of fun. And I think I'm going to pop in this other sketch. Here we go. And that's the previous one. You see I had a lot more warm light in this one, especially across the top surfaces. So thanks again for tuning in, and come back next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.